right, I think that's it. I think we can get started. Thank you all so much for coming today. We're super excited to get this event started and get a little bit more information about the upcoming elections and have a little nice engaging discussion. Before we start, I was gonna show you guys a video of students on campus that had their own opinion about why we should vote. And while I'll pull that one up, I'll ask you guys to introduce yourselves.
I can go first. Hi everyone, I'm Mia and I am the Vice President of the League of Women's Voters chapter here at Fresno State.
Hi everyone, my name is Kamala and I'm the President of the League of Women Voters student chapter here at Fresno State.
Hi everyone, my name is Lexi, pronouns she, they. I am the lead LGBTQ+ student coordinator at the Cross Cultural and Gender Center on campus.
Hi everyone, my name is Kate. This is my service dog Lola, and I serve as treasurer at the Fresno State chapter of the League of Women Voters.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Faith Van Hoven, and I'm currently the student senator for the College of Arts and Humanities.
So why I think it's important to be involved in our democracy is because I feel if we vote, we can get policies that individuals or citizens from the lower level, we can voice those concerns up and find specifically people that represent us and our beliefs.
If you want to be involved and engaged with everything going around in your community, and you want to be like, oh, well, like, why are my taxes up? Why am I paying a little bit more for, stuff that's going on around here? For example, Measure E, pretty controversial decision, or not controversial, but like them raising tuitions, but then also asking for, taxes to be raised in order to help support the school. Stuff like that is stuff you need to be mindful of, and voting helps you be able to have your say in it and have your voice be heard. It's overall just really engaged to know your leaders, the political leaders, and be able to know how they're going to affect and vote in the ways for things and advocate for you in the way that you want to be advocated for.
We should vote because of elections matter, and a few thousand votes can control which policies pass and which don't. In 2020, who controlled Congress came down to less than 7,000 votes. So your vote actually matters.
I believe we should vote because it's part of our patriotic duty to vote, and we as citizens have the ability to vote, so we should vote.
I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, so I guess following up with that, I would like to start with the panel and asking each of you why you think voting is important. And maybe you can talk a little bit about why you think voting in a primary election in particular is important. So maybe we can start at the end with Mia.
One reason that everyone should vote is a lot of times people don't think of their vote matters. I think we've established that pretty early. But your vote really does matter, and it can also go a really, really long way. I just want to mention Kevin McCarthy, who became the Speaker of the House. He was representative of District 20. So, we have control over that, and I just think it's a great reason that everyone should vote.
Okay, great. Oh, Kamala.
I was like, sorry. To me, voting is something that I've always been passionate about, that I've literally, it's gonna sound cheesy, but when I hit 18, I was really excited to, well, you can register before, but to get to vote. And the first election I got to vote in was actually the 2022 general election. And it mattered a lot to me. And growing up, my dad always voted, but not everyone in my family has the right to vote. And even my siblings who do, they didn't take advantage of it, or they didn't even do their duty. And so voting to me matters a lot because it's the way to get your voice heard, it's the way for you to be involved, and it's to get your representation. You can pick, for example, in the primary, you're a senator who gets to go to the top 2. And a lot of people don't think that's important, but they are the issues, they have the issues that we care a lot about. For example, a lot of the issues that are happening right now, some of them believe in it, some of them don't, some of them have certain stances. And a lot of people don't know that we get to decide who gets to go to the general election, who gets to even make it as far for us to decide who gets to represent us. And so to me, that's a part of the reason why voting is really important.
To me, I think it is a way that we can have some control in how our lives go, right? Things are out of our control a lot in our lives and in the world, but voting is a way that we can take charge in our lives and decide what we want our futures to look like, and especially on the local level, Specifically, like for this primary for the Fresno County Board of Supervisors, there is one district in which the primary is just going to decide who gets the position because there's only 2 running. So it's very important to even vote in the primaries because for that specific district, it's going to decide the race. So we have more control than we think, especially on the local level.
Some of the reasons that I think it's really important to vote is that I think a lot of people don't realize that your votes, especially on specific measures and for people in lower offices, can really affect you individually, which is something that I think a lot of people don't realize, especially in the primary election. A lot of people don't realize that you're voting for the person who you want to vote to be president, and that's really important because a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not going to vote because I don't like either option. But you would have had control of that if you would have voted in the primary.
Well, I just want to say that all of the panelists had such lovely responses, and I agree with all of them. But I would argue that the reason why we should vote is because it's a privilege. And I think that it's our duty today, living in the 21st century, to take advantage of the privilege we have as American citizens that not everyone else has. So I think that there's an aspect of duty in regards to our privilege as citizens.
I'm going to come back to that in a minute. We'll talk about that. I think that'll be a good discussion point, a right, a privilege. Okay, so I want to ask you, I will ask Kamala this question for you. So why do you think that voter turnout among young people, and when we talk about young people, we generally mean 18 to 24, why do you think that vote turnout among young people is so low in primaries?
I think a lot of people don't know how much it matters, especially younger. Like, growing up, like, okay, especially in my American government class in high school, my AP government class, all they spoke about was the general, the presidential. All we hear is the president did this, President Biden did this, President Trump did this, everyone did this and that, and just the general. Or all you see is in Congress how like polarized it is, how much they're fighting. And because of that, I think it makes people not want to vote, especially my generation. A lot of them would say my vote doesn't matter, or oh, it's just 2 bad options, or it's just they're so polarized, they're just fighting. It's not even really about policies or what affects us. But I think it does, and I don't think it's as polarized as people like to think, because I was just actually over the weekend in Sacramento at the California Summit with Dr. Cummins and some of my classmates, and a lot of them were saying that locally it's not as polarized, and a lot of people do work together, or they do want to pass policies, but we don't really know that, and we don't see it like that because of the way the media, over time, how polarized it's changed everything, and how everything just seems like a reality TV show in Congress, and how it seems like they're like not really doing much, and I heard a lot of my classmates attest to that.
Okay. Let's see. So, in the primary election in particular, under the California model, there's a lot of local elections on there. Do you think that young people are paying attention to local elections? And if not, why not?
I don't think so, and I think it's a point that Kamala made, is that in our high school government classes, if you get a teacher that actually will go into depth about elections, you're lucky. Usually it's just about the presidential election, the congressional elections. It's not about voting for your county board of supervisors or even getting interested in school board elections, which you can vote for if you're in that district. And that decides a lot, especially for our Fresno County Board of Supervisors election. That will affect a lot of decisions that are made in the next year or two because of the policies that are up right now. So I think a lot of young people just don't even realize it's an option, and when they do, they don't know how to look into it.
Interesting. Kate, do you think that local elections matter to young people, or do you think it's really more policies at the federal level that young people care about?
I absolutely think that local elections matter to young people, even if the young people themselves don't realize it. I think that there are a lot of specific measures, especially where it's really important that young people, we have a lot of life ahead of us, and we have a lot of things that we're going to do, especially in our communities, that these measures will affect, and that if they don't understand that, then they're not voting for it, that it's really important.
Okay, great. Faith. A lot of Californians say that they think their vote doesn't matter, right? Because the state's going to go Democratic anyway. So this year we have a really interesting Senate race where we potentially could end up, if polls are correct, it's sort of neck and neck for who might advance in that second position. Of course, anything can happen in an election, right? It could be Adam Schiff doesn't even advance, who knows? So do you think that when races are, first of all, do you think that it's true that people's vote doesn't matter? So Republicans might feel outnumbered and think they don't matter. Democrats might feel there's already the majority, it doesn't matter. Do you think that that's what makes people feel that way, or do you think there's something else going on?
You know, I think that a lot of people's perception around voting and how much their vote is impacted is now in regards to social media and specifically what's going on in newspapers and the internet. You know, we have this perception of California as being always Democratic, but we see, like with Reagan and Nixon, you know, it can be red. I just think that based off of how we perceive it because of the age that we're in of technology, that we have this idea that, you know, we're so singular and looking through all of this that we are not going to matter. And to some extent, I would honestly agree with it. You know, if you are voting red in a presidential election in California, your vote probably won't matter. And I don't know if that's a controversial take, but I think that it's true given the polls and our current situation.
Mia, how do you respond to people who say, my vote doesn't matter? It's a tough question.
I think it's very easy to just, it does matter, because it does.
Yeah.
I don't know, I kind of start with why. Like, why do people feel that way? Do you feel disconnected from your government? Because that's one thing that a lot of people don't feel that they are connected, or maybe they don't know what's going on, so there's kind of like this, I don't know. I think politics can kind of have this like gatekeeping aspect, where if you feel like you don't know enough about it, then you want to remove yourself from it, because you don't feel justified enough to vote. So kind of like, I like to start there, kind of build confidence. Like, you don't have to know everything about politics to vote. It's for you. The government works for you. We don't expect, or the polls don't expect you to know everything about what you're voting on. But like, that shouldn't remove you from the process, because you have a right to it, and voting is a privilege.
That's a good answer. Well, the privilege came up again. So let's talk about that. So do you guys, you say voting is a privilege, and I think that the undertone there is that not people in all countries don't necessarily have the right to vote, or in fact there's people disenfranchised in our own country who don't have the right to vote. But of course I just referred to it multiple times as the right to vote, right? So it is a right similar to other rights. So do you think that there is a disservice done when people refer to voting as a privilege? Any of you can answer this question. It's a hard one, I know.
I think it should be a right, and I think to some extent it's not fully a right here. I do think, like, okay, for example, citizen, you have to pass this test. How some states have the ID laws, they have like not as much absentee ballots. I do think there could be a lot more done to make it right, but I still consider it a right because there's certain wording, like I think you were kind of like hinting at, there's certain wording that makes people like think, oh, well, I don't want to do it then. Oh, if it's not right, like I don't want to do it. But like it's also in a way a privilege. I don't know where I'm going with this. Basically, I think there could be done a lot more to make it further right. Like talking about other nations, obviously a lot don't have the right to vote. There's some women that don't have the right to vote. They don't even have free elections. They don't even have democracy in general. But here in America, I think there could be a lot more to be done to give it to become a right for everyone to some extent, like of age. I don't think it should be just for citizens, in my opinion. That could be a controversial take. I don't think it should be just for citizens. I don't think it should be hard to become a citizen, as hard as it is, to an extent. And I also think there could be done a lot more to make it more accessible for people.
So Kamala brought up an interesting point, because there are some California communities that are testing allowing non-citizen voting in local elections that impact non-citizen communities. And so I think there is a movement towards thinking about residents versus citizens and how that right extends. So let me ask Mia or Faith, does framing voting as a privilege make it easier to pass restrictions on it, do you think, in your opinion?
I think when I said the word privilege, it was more so like, I do think that voting should be a right. I just more so thought about it from like a gender point of view. Like women didn't always get to vote, and that's what I think of when I'm voting. Like many women before me didn't get to, and so I want to like be able to use my right to vote. So I think I meant it more in that sense.
Okay. Okay.
Then yeah.
Can you explain the portion of the question where you asked about it being a privilege, or framing it as a privilege versus a right. Can you elaborate, please?
Sure. So California has a very accessible voting system, and so in California, you do have to, the first time you register to vote, or if you go to register in person, on election day, for example, they have same-day voter registration. You have to show that your ID that first time, but otherwise, you don't have to show your ID to vote. You can vote by mail. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be a passport or a driver's license, anything with your photo ID, and if you can show a utility bill or something like that, that counts for your ID as well. So it's very flexible. And then there are states that are extremely restrictive. So, states like Kansas, you have to take your birth certificate with you to register to vote. Or states like Wisconsin, you have to have a state-issued ID. It can't be expired, right? It has to be like an active driver's license or an active passport. So those are some restrictions that make it more difficult for people to vote, that might disenfranchise certain segments of the population, especially people maybe who don't drive anymore, who haven't renewed a passport because they're not going to travel abroad, who can't afford a new driver's license. So I just wondered, in the framing of it as a privilege versus a right, do you think it makes it easier for people to restrict access to voting, access to the franchise?
Well, I would say inherently, by calling something a privilege, there's an instance of it being limited to a certain group or population. And I think we see this specifically within our local government and Measure E, and how the Collegian actually released an article against it, and how they explained that 3 of their writers actually abstained from the vote due to the fact that there was an illegal undocumented immigrant who was not able to pass judgment on something that would directly affect them. And so I think my purpose in saying that voting is a privilege, so we should take advantage of that, is elaborating on the fact that because it's a privilege, not everyone has the right to it. Because in America we say everyone has the right to vote, which just blatantly is not true, because we see residents do not have the right to vote. So by framing it as a privilege, I'm kind of tapping into the American mindset of a scarcity, like if you don't have as much of something, you want it more.
Oh.
And so I think that we as Americans should want it more, and it's our duty and our right to take advantage of that privilege.
Interesting question. I mean, interesting point. So, do we have any questions from the, I can keep asking questions. Do we have any questions from the gallery? I saw one up here and one,
I noticed a lot of you mentioned the idea that several voters or people that are just want to be interested in politics in general, just don't know where to find the information to vote, or don't have the information about elections that one would need to know about local elections. What do you think we could do as a local community to make sure that people have access to that information? Because it's one thing to tell people to vote, and it's another thing to make sure that they actually know what they're voting for. So what do you think we can do, or can we do anything to make sure the general population, let's just talk Fresno, is informed about the decisions they're making in the local elections?
where do you all go for information about voting?
I really like the U.S. Secretary of State, or the California Secretary of State. It's my favorite website to go to for voting information. I know it's not popular, but that's my go-to. As far as promoting it, I think social media. I think if we're targeting younger people, that's gonna be the easiest way to get to them.
I might be biased, but I think the League of Women Voters website has I think they have great explanations from obviously everything has bias, but as much nonpartisan as they can be. And something else I like to do when I hear of a measure, and all I hear is oh, you should vote for example, you should vote yes, you should vote yes, you should vote yes. And I'm not sure why people are saying vote yes. All I hear is one side. What I do is I always, and I don't know how great this is, but I'll always vote opposition. I'll always search up opposition to and proponent to, because I want to hear both sides.
Yeah.
Because if I hear yes and it's really biased, I'm no, there's something missing. There's opposition to everything, and I'm not saying it might be great, but I want to hear it so I can make my own informed opinion of it. But I don't have a set website for that. I just go to a bunch, and there's always local news, or the Collegian, for example. I really like their article on it, and I read it this morning because I saw political science department post it. So I read it this morning actually before I came to class, and then before that I was looking at opposition and proponent for it. But I do like the League of Women Voters, and I also like Cal Matters. I do like Cal Matters.
Which is great. Yeah, so I put up, it was blinding them, so I closed it. But 411vote.org, which I think, did that used to be Voters Edge? Okay. Yeah, so that used to be Voters Edge, which the League of Women Voters endorses. And 411, Vote 411, you can go in and you can put in your own address, and it'll pull up everybody all the races that are going to be on your ballot, the measures that are going to be on your ballot. So, for example, if you live in Fowler, you have a measure that'll be on your ballot that other people in Fresno County don't have. And so if you put in your address, it'll pull up everything on your ballot for you. It's great. The League of Women Voters is a great resource. I also endorse League of Women Voters often. And it also will show you where your nearest polling locations and nearest drop boxes are. So it's a really useful site. And you can register to vote there too if you're not registered. So, we have a question in the back.
So when I hear people talk about rights and privileges, I think of them as being synonymous with each other. If you were to think about that for a second, about how rights and privileges are really in some ways the same thing, because a right is a privilege, and not everybody has the privilege of rights. So with that idea, does that change your answer at all?
So are you, sorry, I need to clarify.
I think in some ways that's what Mia's answer was.
Yeah.
Right, that she saw them as fairly similar. But, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the way I see it is, I don't know if I need clarification or not, but for example, there's a lot that people view as rights that I would view as a privilege, because I can come from a background where it's not there, it's not apparent, it's not normalized, and it's becoming there, but it's not normalized, and I don't view it as when I say it's a privilege, like, oh, it shouldn't be a right, oh, I don't think it is a right, but as in because it's not there for me, it's not normalized for me, I'm more passionate about it, I care about it a lot more. For example, education for that is for me. Obviously, I think there could be a lot more to make it even more of a right in America, but for me, I view it as a privilege, it's not to take away to make it less accessible to people, to make them less wanting to go because they might not view it, because they might view it as a privilege, but to me, education is a lot harder to grapple in my culture, and so to me, I care for it a lot more. So that's how I would view it, kind of similar to what Mia was saying with the women voting.
Yes, Dr. Fiona.
Yeah, what about duty? Is there a duty to vote? You know, you have to pay your taxes. If you get called for jury duty, you gotta go. But you don't have to vote. Yeah, you gotta sign up for selective. You don't have to vote. That seems backwards. And Dr. Bryant, are there some countries where you actually have to vote? Like, you're required to vote?
Yeah, there's conscription where you have to vote. And in most of those countries, you don't get jailed or anything like that, but you do pay a fine. There's a tax. Similar to not having health insurance in the United States, there's now a tax associated with that. You will get a fine or a tax, or you might lose your ability to vote in the next election. But there are countries where there is a punitive measure if you don't vote. There's also like a social stigma to not voting and participating. But some countries where it is by conscription, where you are forced to vote, they do have an option to be a conscientious objector to everybody on the ballot. And so you have a special crayon with a special mark that you can mark through your ballot to show, I don't like any of these candidates, right? I don't think that the system represents me. And so some countries, some Central American countries, for example, El Salvador has that option where you can be a conscientious objector. And so you don't get punished, you don't get fined or taxed, but you have the right to say, I don't like the system, I'm not supporting this. Right?
I mean,
Should we have such a duty?
So should you be required, I think is the question on the floor.
I mean, I can tackle that. You know, as a philosophy major, I have very many opinions about the idea of our duty as citizens. But I would first refer to the idea that duty versus right. So I think that right, there's inherently implied that you should do this because you're given it. Where duty, I feel like it's more of a normative claim. You know, you ought to do this as your duty. And so I think that applies specifically in regards to voting. You know, you ought to vote because you are participating in our social contract as Americans. You know, we are paying taxes, we're doing these things, so there's an idea of ought with the duty, so I think it's our duty, we ought to do this, but I don't think that we have to do it. I think there's a choice.
Does anyone else want to answer that question?
I think there's pros and cons to everything. So, okay, Dr. Vieira, for example, was telling us about Peru, how, I think Peru, correct me if I'm wrong, how they have to vote, it's, or they get taxed or like punished in some way. But a lot of them, because of that, he's saying a lot of his friends just go and they just like mark, and they leave, mark, and they leave. And a lot of people, which from one side will criticize voting with people like direct democracy, a lot of people criticize our initiative status here and the way of the process is by saying, well, not everyone's informed, or we're not making decisions that are right, like not everyone's informed, they're just voting, which I think takes away from voting in general. Like when they say that, it just makes people not want to vote. But because of that, I think there's pros and cons to everything. I think the pro is you're getting more people's voice, you're getting more of a democracy. It's more direct democracy because you're getting more, like for example, our initiatives, more people are voting in them. And then for the presidential, you have more of the voices. But also when you have duty to vote and people are forced to go to the electoral college, I feel like also takes away from like direct democracy and like directly picking someone, because the majority will want one candidate but the other candidate will get it because they got the electoral college vote. So I just think there's pros and cons to everything, and I should really make an opinion on it, so I really should.
So let's see, I'm going to ask you a question. So you're the LGBT student coordinator, right? So in addition to young people not being, I want to ask you about outreach and mobilization. How do you mobilize people? So as an LGBTQ coordinator, I'm sure that like sort of mobilizing and getting people involved is one of the things that you do, right? Is that right?
Definitely.
Is that a good assumption?
Yes.
Okay. So we know that in the United States, young people tend to turn out in lower numbers, but also there are other underrepresented communities in voting, especially Latino voters, and in many places Asian American voters. And so how do you think, what kind of efforts should young people make to try and increase voter turnout in communities that are not equally represented or fairly represented?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. For the younger populations, I think social media is a really powerful tool, as well as an example of this is like Powered Action California is organizing a little hangout, actually this Saturday, I believe, where they're going to talk about what measures are on the ballot, how can I turn in my ballot, if I got a mail-in, how do I complete it, you know? Is actually organizing like physical spaces where people can go that's run by young people. So it feels less intimidating than say going to like a class that is talking about voters' rights, but it's like an older person who is very knowledgeable about the topic, because that can seem very intimidating. That's not my representative at all.
I used to think I was young, but I'm moving into older person.
No. But being in spaces with your peer group, whether that is age, whether that is your cultural identity, sexuality, gender identity, actually being in spaces with your peer group and informing each other collectively, I think is a really good way to do it that releases a lot of the pressure around it.
That's a good answer. Also backed by science. It's really good. Kate, so what do you think are the biggest obstacles for young people to vote in California? Like, what are the biggest challenges that they face?
I think there's a wide range of challenges that different young people can face. Personally, coming from as a member of the disabled community, there's a lot more challenges for me. I remember in the 2020 election, I wasn't old enough to vote, but I was recovering from a major surgery, and my mom was in the hospital with me, and she said, "Thank goodness I have this mail-in ballot because I wouldn't be leaving you today to go vote." And I think for the more general population, I think that the biggest obstacle is lack of knowledge on the importance and lack of knowledge on what is actually in the ballot. I know a lot of people who are like, I don't understand what any of these measures are, so I'm just not going to vote on any of them, when I think that you should, that they're really important and a lot of them can actually affect you directly. So I think the lack of knowledge is the biggest obstacle, but I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm too busy with school, I just don't have the time to go do all of this, and I think that's another obstacle that a lot of people face.
Do we have any other questions from the floor?
I have a question. So I just turned 18, so this is the first time I'll be able to vote. And I hear from like a lot of people kind of saying like, oh, you know, a lot of young people don't know how to vote. And I took AP Government, and my teacher always kept saying, you know, young people never vote. And so coming from me, I feel like I have a lot of friends, and I think voting is probably the last thing on their mind. And now that I came to college, I have like a lot more like diverse group of friends, and a lot of people who are more like politically active, people are like encouraging me to vote, like Carola. And so I really just registered to vote because I went to a meeting to support her with some of our friends. And so what is some things like as a campus, like do you guys think that Fresno State could do just to try to kind of get more people kind of involved when people are like walking to class? Because I just feel like even for me, like even now, even though I've gone to some meetings, I have no idea how to vote. And I don't know what my first steps would be. And obviously I could do with like a quick Google search. But be like people say, like, you know, it's like the last thing in the back of my mind is like, as a young person, oh, I need to remember to vote, you know?
Yeah. I'm happy to hear your guys' responses, and then I have an old person response for you.
I just think it's funny because there's a very big element of like groupthink when it comes to voting, and just going back to like younger people and not voting, you hear so many times like older people vote and younger people don't. and even that sentiment alone like affects you because the Olympic people will take care of that. I don't have to worry about it. So like when we factor that in, I would love to see like an event on campus that had a high attendance and like a lot of people went to and was like based on voting or maybe like talked about measures or propositions and you know people walking see, oh my gosh, like there's this big event and maybe even possibly some food, and they think to stop or just inform themselves, like getting like numbers group, like there's power in numbers. So just like a bigger event, I think would be like good and beneficial.
I think something I've noticed, and maybe it's because I'm always glued to my email, like it's my first social media app, like so the first thing I check is, I always look at the mass communication that's sent out, and I know there's one from the president. I always look at the political science department one, obviously. And you guys also do a great job. I know you have the election teach-in, but I would really like it where there's like a mass email that's sent out that can reach as much people. For example, the president's one that has like a step-by-step, as simple as possible, what people can do. And I know we have like the ballot drop-off at the rec center, but I had a class there, and I hated driving there, and I don't go to the rec center because I just don't work out. So I think if we had one on campus, that would make it much easier. I could bring it with me and just drop it off like nearby. I think that would make it a lot easier, and I would also like it if so I know there's been like some endorsements on campus or how some organizations are talking more about one measure than others. I would like it if not really endorsing a measure. I would not want to put someone in the situation where they're endorsing a measure, but like where they're even like having information on it, or it's like even like the president just explaining the different propositions. And I know we have a wide range of students. They can be from Tulare. We even have international students. We even have out-of-state students. But as much as possible as we can include, especially Fresno County, not just limiting it to one measure, but limiting it to a lot more. Not limiting it, but including a lot more that we can educate on, not really endorse, but educate on.
I mean, I have two perspectives on this. My first perspective is that we just need to shove information in young people's faces. I think that our attention span is so incredibly short that the best way to do that is to bring and invite people onto campus and specifically utilize our free speech area and just really shove information into our faces, because I think if we shove information, we'll take at least some bit of it and it might pique our curiosity. My second idea about this is that young people have this idea of fallibility. You know, we have the fallibility of youth. We think that nothing's going to affect us. And I think that we need to be shown that these laws will impact us because they're not just being set in stone now. They're there forever until we fix them or change them. So we need to be reminded of the fact that we are the future, and that needs to be shoved into our faces.
What do you think are the best sources for, like, so Kamala says email, but like what do you think are the best sources for putting it in front of young people's faces?
Oh yeah, I can answer again. I just don't think you guys want to hear me speak that much.
Sure, or where do all of you get your information? Like,
Yeah, we'll
if you happen upon it, where would be the best place to put that information? Where do you spend your time online?
TikTok.
That's
really
insane.
bad. It's really bad. That's true. And I know I don't take everything at face value, but that app, there's just something about it. I think it's the short attention span, honestly, because videos are like no more than like a minute normally.
Right.
Like, and that's really nice and it's really convenient. And plus I'm already like on it, so.
Okay. You have to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's true.
Personally, I take everything I see on social media with a grain of salt. I do not see that as a reliable source for myself, especially regarding current events and like election things. I think for a lot of people, that's the only thing that they're willing to do. Personally, I do a lot of reading of articles from trusted sources. I watch the news every day. But I think that's a little bit of a stretch for a lot of people. But I think even just going to places where that they can have conversations with other people like this, like I have the privilege of having one parent as a registered Republican and one parent as a registered Democrat. And both my parents have doctorate degrees, so they're very educated on a lot of things. And that's honestly where I get a lot of my information, is through discussions with the both of them, understanding both sides of the situation. And I know not everybody has that, but I think that conversations with people, especially people who are really educated, is one of the best ways to get your information and also to understand the things that are on the ballot.
So that's a good segue. So I want to go back to your question about like how do you learn how to vote? I would say suggestions could be, you could have ballot parties, right? Where you have groups of friends come together and bring your ballots and fill out your ballots and talk about the issues. It used to be a bigger thing before COVID, and like they've sort of gone away. But you know, that means that obviously somebody has to take the initiative to do that, and then like want to thoughtfully think about them. I brought with me, I just carry it with me everywhere I go. No, if you just register to vote, you won't receive one in the mail. But if you were registered before, you get your voter election guide from the Secretary of State, and every registered voter gets one, and that has information in it that many people find useful. There are candidate statements in there, and full disclosure, I will tell all of you because often people are not aware of this. The candidates submit their own statements about themselves, and sometimes they're quite lengthy, and sometimes they're quite short, and that's because they pay per word. So depending on how much they want to spend on that and how their campaign budget works, that's why some of them are quite short. But that's the candidate's own personal statement. And then there are statements in here about the various measures, and there's a pro statement and a con statement for most of the measures. And so that's one place you can look. There's the 411 website that I mentioned earlier. That can tell you where to go vote and where to take your ballot. There's a great website. It's a nonprofit organization called California Choices that has a lot of information. It has pros and con statements about the different measures and propositions that are on the ballot. So those are some good sources to find information that tells you a little bit from sort of both sides. But in terms of like the mechanics of filling out your ballot, so you can either do it at home, and then I will say to everybody, has anybody voted by mail before? I mean, I know some people have, yes, but and young people. So two things about voting by mail. Just make sure that when you complete your ballot, that you make sure you sign your ballot, because if your ballot's not signed, it can't be counted. And you don't have to put postage on your ballot. You can drop it in a USPS mailbox, and it will get delivered to the clerk's office, and they will count your ballot. You can also put it in a ballot drop box. There is no longer one. Who said they drove to the? It was you, Colin, right? There is no longer one at the Student Rec Center. It has moved in front of Maya Cinemas over at Campus Point. So if you want to drop your ballot in a ballot drop box, you have to go over to Campus Point. Or you can take it to the polling location, the vote center location, which is still in the Student Rec Center. And so you can go there and vote as well. And we have, as far as filling out your ballot goes, so, you know, nobody can tell you how to fill out your ballot. I mean, your friends or parents or partner could try. But your ballot is yours. I think the key things, and I'm not going to put it on the screen unless you guys want me to. The key things to remember: you only fill out one person for each race. The top two system, very common. There's some lovely ladies in the back of the room who have unfolded many a ballot in their day, and can tell you that a common error on ballots is for people to fill out more than one candidate in a race, which means your vote doesn't get counted for that race. The rest of the ballot will get counted, but that race will not be counted. It will be thrown out, because if they can't determine the voter intent, then they can't count that. So even our top two system, you only get to vote for one person. So make sure you don't fill out multiple bubbles. But you can print out your ballot ahead of time, like on Vote 411. Or if you do get a voter guide, there'll be like a sample ballot inside. And you can make your choices on that, and you can take it with you to the voting booth and take it in so that you can fill out your ballot from your decisions you made. Because sometimes people get nervous in the ballot. They think they have to rush because maybe there's people waiting and things like that. But you can take your choices with you, and you can fill them in. So that's also maybe a source of comfort for some people who are voting the first time, that you have that option to do that.
We have 15 minutes left if you wanted to switch to your slides or anything like that, or if you wanted to continue, it's up to you.
It's up to you. I mean, so I have slides that talk about how to register to vote, where to find your voting locations, and then what's on the ballot this election for the primary. So I can talk about those things if you want, or we can do, if people had more questions that they wanted to ask. Did any of you have things you wanted to talk about, or last comments that you wanted to share with the audience?
My favorite part about voting, besides doing my duty, is the I voted sticker. I still have mine since 2022 November. I think they're so cute. If you want a sticker, you should vote regardless. It's a plus, and I'm very proud of mine.
Yes.
Could you explain the crossover and the party for like a new voter? You know, like, right? If you're not in the party, you don't get to vote in that primary. And how's that work in
So it
California?
varies by, yes. So we have what's called a modified open primary system in California. And so the parties get to decide whether or not to let you vote on their ballot. So if you are if you want to vote the Democratic ballot, you can be registered Democrat, or you can be registered. You can be no party preference. If you're not registered with the party, you can vote on the Democratic ballot. I think if you are Green Party, you can vote the Democratic ballot, if I remember correctly. But it's a little bit more flexible, and the biggest sort of, I would say, I guess, benefit is the Democratic Party allows no party preference voters to vote on the Democratic ballot. That means that you will see for the presidential primary, you'll only get the Democratic candidates on the ballot. The Republican, if you're a registered Republican, the Republican ballot and the Republican Party has decided to keep it more like a closed primary, where only registered Republicans are allowed to vote on their ballot. And so you'll see the Republican candidates on that ballot. And so that is left up to each party in California. That's unusual because most states either have a closed primary where Democrats can vote on Democratic ballots, Republican ballots, and no party preference voters, which the majority of 18 to 24-year-olds are no party preference registrants, don't get to vote on anything, except for other state races that are nonpartisan. But California is different in that way. Some states have an open primary where anybody could give up. Yes, did that answer that question?
I actually had a question for you guys. How would learning, or how could we make learning about voting easier for you guys, or just more digestible in general? Like, what do you guys look to? Where do you guys go? Do you not go out of your way to look at information, which is okay to admit, or do you? What do you guys prefer?
So one thing that I notice on the ballot a lot of the time is, especially with the initiatives and the measures, they're worded in very insane wording. It's like, it's always in the most deliberately confusing way, where there was one a few years ago where it's like, if you voted yes, it meant no, and if you voted no, it meant yes. It was a weird wording.
Was it the Lyft Uber?
Yes, that one. It was so confusing where I'm like, I don't know what I'm voting for. And so I feel like if there is a way to like take that language and make it more understandable, so like you know clearly what that measure is actually like saying.
Yeah.
Or especially like in like the proposals and that happened, I think in the general. I don't know if it was in the primary one. But like those, I feel like making those at a reading level that is more comprehensible, because I know that it's like, I don't remember if it's like what grade level it's like written at, but it's always
it's like 22nd grade.
Yeah, it's like something like graduate, but like the average I think reading level is like 8th grade in like most population. So if there was a way for you guys to like share that information, I don't know, I feel like social media is probably the best way to distribute it, because that's where a lot of us go.
I've always said I thought a really good ballot proposition would be an actual citizen initiative ballot proposition would be to make a ballot proposition that says that ballot propositions can be at no higher than a 10th grade reading level, so that people could actually understand them. Because there's actually a great website where you can look at how ballot language varies by reading level by state, and California is exceptionally high. It's really a lot of legalese. Part of that is because somebody brought up direct democracy earlier. Yeah, Kamala brought up direct democracy earlier. And so we have a direct democracy system. Most states in the United States do not have direct democracy, which is where citizens can put initiatives on the ballot by collecting signatures from registered voters that is equal to a percentage of the votes that were cast in the previous statewide election. So it varies every election. So low turnout elections, presidential years have a lot of propositions because midterm years have lower turnout. So you need to put fewer signatures to get propositions on the ballot in a presidential year. And so the problem with direct democracy, as I see it, others can weigh in on this, is that it has really moved away from its intention of being citizen initiatives, because most of them are not driven by citizens anymore. They are driven by interest groups and corporations, and most of the signatures, people are paid to collect those signatures. And so it's not necessarily the people who have the interest of that ballot proposition who are the ones circulating the measure and collecting the signatures. It's not always the case, but it is often the case. And so I think that direct democracy has been somewhat adulterated because of that. So we end up with, like voting on dialysis, when I think why should California, why should the average citizen be voting on people's access to medical care in initiatives that are not initiated by citizens? I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, there's some questions about that. I guess we can move on to talking about what's on the ballot this year if you guys would like to spend a few minutes doing that, or if anybody has any questions.
Oh, I actually have another question.
Okay.
Sorry.
No?
I feel like with this coming up, like this is like a presidential election, the kind of like aura surrounding it right now is it's kind of like, okay, this is not what I think, but this is just saying like the vibe from it. It's basically like, oh, it's like the better of two bads. That's kind of
The
like
lesser of two evils?
Yeah, lesser of two evils. Like,
Better of
that's
two bads is good too.
that's like the like kind of what everyone's just throwing and like even on like social media, that's like the thing they keep putting out like, who do I even vote for? I don't even like either of them. How do you think that people should kind of like battle that, like whether that be like Sigma or battle that like idea or decide like that they should still vote even if they don't like either candidate more than the other?
Can I add on to the question?
Yeah.
I think to add on to the question, do you think voting third party could solve the issue of the lesser of two evils, voting for someone other than Biden or Trump?
Do any of you want to tackle that? Oh, there's more. Okay, well, let's tackle the initial questions that are out there. How do you grapple with the idea that you're voting for the lesser of two evils? Does anybody feel that way?
Yeah.
A couple of hands have gone up.
Sorry.
You
go ahead, no.
Oh, thank you. Okay, let me just make something up. I think that, I don't know, I feel like it's a very interesting perspective because, you know, by saying that, you know, the lesser of two evils, I think you're inherently implying that there's some kind of corruption, or it's just not possible for the average person to run for the presidential election. And so I think that when we're taking that into effect, we have to realize that, you know, the president is so far removed from us that, you know, I look at it as, you know, I have a duty to vote. I'm going to focus on what is going to directly affect me, and that's going to be the locals and the primaries. So I focus on really putting my attention and my research into that specific area. And then, you know, when the presidential election comes down and there's two candidates that have really the only possibility of winning, you know, I look at essentially which one is going to cause me less pain.
Mm-hmm. Anybody want to add?
Yeah, that was my final thought.
I remember this was happening in the 2020 election. I was on TikTok a lot more. It was all on TikTok. I remember all my siblings really didn't want to vote, and I remember my dad would make jokes about voting for one side over the other because he just likes to play devil's advocate with me. And I remember the one argument I would hear was one of them's gonna win, so instead of taking the vote from one you would be okay with more than the other, you should just put your vote towards that one.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, it's two. It's the Republican nominee against the Democratic nominee. And so when you third-party vote, from what I've seen, and this could be controversial also, from what I've seen, when you third-party vote, you're taking essentially a vote away from a candidate. That person is not going to win. I mean, we get 1 or 2 states electoral college votes for it, but they will not be as much as the other two, and so they won't win. So when you do that, you're just kind of taking away from the productiveness of even getting the candidate you would view as less evil in, and so that's my perspective on it.
I would say that the candidate is the head of the party, but that what you really need to think about voting for is what party agenda or policy agenda do you agree with the most? Because the bills that come across the desk of the president can be signed or vetoed. And so what bills are they going to support and endorse and sign, and what bills are they going to veto? And I think that it's important, and I think more so than ever, to think about the courts, and that the president has a lot of influence with the courts. And so what types of judges are they going to appoint to the benches? And I think that in the last couple of years, we have seen the fallout of what changing the structure of both lower courts and the Supreme Court looks like. And so it could be that you don't like the guy occupying the office, but that guy is representative of more than the individual, right? And so that's usually my response to people who say it's a lesser of two evils. It's like, rather than using negative language of thinking like I'm voting for the two guys I don't like, think about it in terms of like, well, I'm voting for an agenda that I hope to see.
Kind of in the same vein, what is your opinion on write-in candidates, or when you don't agree with something, writing in? Because from my perspective, if say there was a large amount of people that wrote in, and say 10%, somebody won by like 2%, do you think that changes and forces the political parties to change their thinking in order to get those votes to become successful?
Like writing for the primaries, or?
In any race, whether it's a presidential race or it's a local race, if none of the candidates speak to you, do you think there's a value in, rather than just abstaining from voting and writing in a write-in candidate, because it can change the dynamics of the race, or force them to recognize that there's a discussion that's not being had.
Didn't this just happen in Michigan, where people, they were Democrats, I think, who chose just not to vote for Biden?
Yeah.
Right.
No, well, and it happened to Nikki Haley in Nevada.
Yeah.
She lost to none of the above candidates, right? Yeah. So, yeah. So I don't know if people have thoughts about that. I think write-in candidates are tricky because you have to be a certified write-in candidate for the votes to count for the write-in candidate. And so I think a lot of people are not aware of that, and they write in their friends' names and Mickey Mouse and God and, you know, you see all kinds of things. If you ever go volunteer to be a poll worker or to open ballots down at the county clerk's office, you see a lot of interesting votes cast. But most of those votes don't count because in order to your write-in vote to count, it has to be somebody who has gone to the clerk's office and certified as a write-in candidate so that those votes will actually count towards that person. So a write-in could win if they went in and they certified and they garnered enough signatures. But most of the time, that is not where the write-in candidates go. They usually go to people who are saying, like, I'm going to vote for Mickey Mouse or my mom or whatever, you know. So just be aware of that. You can you can go to the clerk's website and look at who certified write-in candidates are, and see if you agree with any of them.
I do think that even, like, I'm not saying you should write in a candidate, but I think, for example, the Michigan one, I think it sent a strong message. Like, there's been opposition to Biden ever since what's been going on in the Gaza. There's been a lot of opposition, and I believe he even canceled the rally in Michigan because it's like.
Oh, because of Dearborn.
Yeah, there's a lot of Arabs. It's like the Middle East, and there's a lot of Arabs. Like when I see a lot of Arabs, I like to joke that it's Dearborn, Michigan.
Yeah,
because there's a lot.
That's true.
Yeah, and so he knew. That's why he canceled it. He knew he would get booed. He knew he would get a lot of opposition. He knew it would just be like a protest against him, and that's exactly why they didn't vote for him. And obviously they don't. And a lot of them don't also agree with the other side. Yeah. So I think. I would hope that they would take that message and they would think, okay, I'm losing a lot of votes, and they do care about the votes at the end of the day. Why am I losing that? And he knows why he's losing that. And try to do something to fix it, but sadly, some of the time they don't listen, and we see that with our U.S. senators too. The ones that are running the U.S. senators, there's only really one that's, and I'm biased when I'm saying this, that's really for a ceasefire, and the other ones are not really taking much into account for it because maybe of the congressional districts as well, because the one for the ceasefire is she's representing Oakland, and there's a lot of Arabs there too, and so she also has to think about that when she's running, so if she doesn't win. And so I don't know if the Michigan one's going to impact them as much. It is heavily populated, but I would hope it would send a message for them to try to listen to the voters.
Right. Yeah, it was obviously, I think it was done very strategically in Michigan because it was clearly sort of a protest vote, right? Knowing that, but the state is up for grabs. It's a swing state, and interestingly, Trump is pulling ahead in Michigan right now. So it's an interesting thing. I do want to take. We have 5 minutes. I do want to take a couple of minutes to talk about a few oddities on the ballot this year, and then answer any questions you may have. So, on your ballot this year, the Senate race. Let me just go to it. If you live in Fresno County and you want to know where voting locations are in Fresno County, the county clerk's website, whether you like the county clerk or not, his staff has done an incredible job in making the website much more accessible to voters this year. And if you haven't had a chance to meet the county clerk, I work with him on research, so I have a bias, but he's an incredibly nice person. Anyway, if you want, they have English. You can look up voter center lists in English. You can look it up in Spanish. There's a map. There's a map of just Dropbox, and all of this is point and click on the county clerk's website now, which it didn't used to be. You used to have to navigate through menus, and it's very nice now. This is an actual screenshot from their website. And you can find the map of places in case you want to find. And so we are, I think, number 30 up there is where the Fresno State website is. And we have a Dropbox location at Maya Cinemas, like I mentioned. You can also track your ballot. So this is a voter confidence measure to try and increase people's confidence that their ballots are being received. So you get updated text messages from the county that says, we've received your ballot, we've verified your ballot's being processed. Right, and so you, and if you had signed up in time, then it would also tell you your ballot has been mailed to you, and that you should have received your ballot today. So you can go to Where's My Ballot at the Secretariat website, track that if you want to. Okay, a couple things I want to mention. I'm going to skip some of these, but I want to talk about the Senate race because it's a little strange this year. So we have the Senate race. We have a partial term due to the death of Dianne Feinstein, and we had LaFonza Butler was appointed for part of the partial term, but it expires in November. And so on your ballot, you will see under the US Senate election, you have a full term race to vote for, which has numerous candidates. Those are people who are running for her replacement seat. And you have a partial term, which has fewer candidates. You'll notice most of these candidates appear on the full term race as well. But if you say your preferred candidate, whether it be Barbara Lee or Adam Schiff or Steve Garvey, or a write-in, if you want to write in someone, you have to vote for them. If you want them for both the partial term, which would be from November to January 7th, I believe, then you have to vote for them in the partial term, and then you also have to vote for the full term, and you also have to vote for the full term race as well. And so you do have two different races. Remember, vote for only one candidate in both of them. The top two vote getters will then go on. So for the Senate, we have the primary election now. We have the election for the full term in November. But for the partial, we have the primary election now, and then potentially the runoff in May. So we have lots of Senate elections this year. Similar, somebody mentioned District 20, Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy's district is also a partial election term, and so on March 19th, I believe, so you'll get another mail-in ballot. That is not a mistake. You really should get another mail-in ballot if you live in District 20, and that's just for the special election to fill the rest of his term. And so that is March 19th, and then I think potentially that is May? If it needs to be, it's in May, right? Then potentially another election in May.